Harriet Bellwether had not planned on playing detective that bright Tuesday morning. She was simply walking her old beagle, Toby, along their usual route through Blaine Park in the heart of Dogwood Dale. The dog was as excited as ever, sniffing every blade of grass and greeting anyone who came within tail-wagging distance. Harriet always loved the peaceful start to her day, strolling past the oak trees that lined the winding path. This morning, though, she sensed something amiss. The air seemed charged with a hidden secret, and Harriet's gaze drifted to a locked shed that perched near the park's southern edge. It was a well-known structure, or at least everyone knew of it. Nobody really went near it because it was always locked, an unassuming outbuilding that held seasonal lawn equipment. Yet Harriet noticed something new this time. A set of footprints circling around the shed's door. She paused at once, pulling Toby gently to her side. Upon closer inspection, she saw several overlapping footprints, varying in size, stamped in a loop around the little building. At that early hour the grass was damp, so Harriet could see each imprint clearly. She tilted her head, trying to make sense of the pattern. The footprints weren't random. It looked as though multiple individuals had approached from different directions, converged at the door, and then dispersed. Harriet found herself unnerved by the discovery. The caretaker, Mr. Briggs, usually came by once a week to check the shed, but only his boots ever made marks in that grassy patch. These new footprints looked fresh less than a day old by her estimate. Toby whined softly and tried to nose underneath the corner of the shed as if sensing mystery too. Harriet began to wonder if there'd been a break-in or some clandestine meeting in the park after dark. She then stood up, resolved to keep a closer eye on that inconspicuous structure. As she continued her walk, Harriet couldn't help but glance back at the shed and the footprints that seemed to follow her thoughts the rest of the morning. Harriet prided herself on her observational skills. These had been honed over years of dog walking for neighbors and friends. She was in general an easygoing chatterbox, the sort of person who made casual acquaintances in minutes and dear friends in a few short days. Harriet concluded that her next step was to gather information from anybody who might have seen unusual activity. After all, Dogwood Dale was a friendly place, where people noticed everything, especially around the local park. If someone had been furtively creeping near that shed, Harriet felt certain a jogger or a night shift nurse who cut through the park might have spotted them. She strolled toward a small bench near the gazebo where Mrs. Jenkins often sat to feed the ducks or enjoy the sunshine. Sure enough, the older woman was there, tossing pieces of stale bread into the pond. Harriet, dog leash in hand, greeted Mrs. Jenkins, hoping to learn if the footprints around the shed were old news. Mrs. Jenkins, startled by mention of suspicious tracks, instantly bristled with curiosity. She shifted on the bench and said, "Well, dear, I haven't noticed anything in particular, but I heard a rumor from someone at the grocery store about people skulking around the park late at night. Maybe you want to speak with Mr. Briggs or that new groundskeeper, Adam. I've seen them tinkering with the lock on that shed a few days ago." Thanking Mrs. Jenkins for the tip, Harriet moved on. She noticed a series of small birds perched along the wrought iron fence, chirping quite loudly as if they too had secrets to share. Toby, pads clicking softly against the pavement, seemed unaffected by the conversation, but Harriet's mind buzzed with questions. What if someone was vandalizing the park or stealing equipment? Was there something precious hidden inside the shed? Harriet's imagination churned with possibilities. By the time she and Toby finished the circuit and headed home, Harriet had decided on a plan. She would talk to Mr. Briggs and find out what, if anything, he knew. That afternoon, Harriet left Toby napping by the fireplace and ventured back to the park on her own. She spotted Mr. Briggs trimming the hedge along Barnaby Lane, just across from the playground. He was a stout, middle-aged man with a permanently tanned forehead and bluish overalls. Harriet respected his diligent nature. She'd always noticed that he took pride in keeping Dogwood Dale's public spaces neat as a pin. Stepping around scattered clippings of privet hedge, she approached with a friendly wave. Morning, Mr. Briggs, Harriet began. I was taking my dog around the park earlier today and noticed quite a few footprints around that old shed of yours. Seemed unusual, given how seldom it's opened. Has anyone been messing with it? Mr. Briggs looked up, frowning behind the brim of his cap. Footprints? His tone was wary, but Harriet couldn't tell if it was actual surprise or guarded caution. I haven't seen anything suspicious, but then again, I've been busy trimming these hedges all day. Sensing a hint of tension, Harriet tried a gentler approach. I just want to make sure no one is causing trouble in the park, she said brightly. I know you keep a good eye on things. There might be a local mischief maker. Could be, he allowed. Some folks in town are none too bright about how they behave after sundown. If you see anything else odd, let me know. I'll check the lock on the shed this evening. Harriet nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Briggs was deliberately withholding something. There was a quietness in his eyes that made her uneasy. However, lacking concrete evidence of wrongdoing, she thanked him and headed to the small bakery at the park's edge to pick up a loaf of bread. As she walked away, Harriet glanced back and saw Mr. Briggs standing rigid, as though lost in thought. She wondered if he had his own reasons for wanting the shed's secrets to stay locked away. Although it was Tuesday, Harriet decided to meet her good friend Connie for an impromptu lunch at the Dogwood diner. Connie, with a stack of library books always under her arm and a perpetual smile, was Harriet's confidant whenever a puzzle needed unravelling. The diner was a cosy establishment, adorned with checkered tablecloths, brimming with the aroma of bacon and fresh coffee. They slid into a booth near the window, Harriet with a small salad and Connie with her usual tuna melt. So, Connie said, leaning forward with keen interest, what's this about footprints in the park? Harriet explained everything she'd seen. How the footprints clustered around the shed, the conversation with Mrs. Jenkins, and her unsettling talk with Mr. Briggs. Connie gave a soft hum of contemplation. You know, she said, I've heard that the shed has been around since the 120th. Rumour has it there's a hidden compartment inside, though that could be pure hearsay. I recall reading about it in some local historical pamphlet. Now, why would someone need a hidden compartment in a basic utility shed? Harriet mused. It's not like it was a secret safe or something truly valuable, unless someone stored away something personal, or they're just trying to keep out of sight. Could be anything, Connie said, tapping her chin. Perhaps we should do a bit more listening around town. Dogwood Dale is small, but it has its share of stories. I'll ask around at the library. Maybe there are records of repairs or unusual incidents involving that shed. You, meanwhile, can keep your eyes peeled in the park. Delighted with their new mission, Harriet sipped her tea. Despite the whimsical nature of the mystery, she found herself excited to have something to investigate. It made her morning dog walks feel purposeful, as though Toby were now leading her along the path to a solution rather than just a scenic stroll. When they parted ways, Harriet left with a sense of determination. Sooner or later, the footprint's source would reveal itself. The following morning, Harriet arrived at the park just as the sun was rising. Toby in tow, she proceeded directly to the shed. At first glance, it appeared unchanged. The lock remained on the door, the surrounding grass glistening with dew. But as she squatted down, Harriet noticed fresh footprints overlain on yesterday's smudges. She counted 3 distinct sets, each of varying size. At least one was made by a small shoe, possibly a woman's. Toby sniffed vigorously, trotting around the perimeter, tail wagging, as if energized by the new scents. This is definitely not just Mr. Briggs, Harriet muttered under her breath. Why on earth would multiple people be sneaking around? She tried peeking through one of the dusty windows, but it was covered with grime and the interior was too dark to see. Determined not to jump to conclusions, Harriet circled the building, checking for signs of tampering. The lock seemed intact. No scratches or dents that would indicate forced entry, yet the footprints didn't lie. Someone was definitely paying the shed more attention than was typical. Just as Harriet was concluding her inspection, she spotted Adam, the new groundskeeper, trudging along the main path. Unlike Mr. Briggs' gruffness, Adam was typically talkative and good-humoured. Harriet flagged him down with a wave. "Hey, Adam, mind if I ask you something? You wouldn't happen to have noticed folks creeping around the shed, would you?" Adam rubbed the back of his neck. "Funny you should ask. I'm supposed to help Mr. Briggs with that old shed sometime this week. Tighten a few hinges, maybe patch up holes. He mentioned something about it needing extra security. You might want to ask him directly, though. He's in charge of keys." Adam offered a shrug. "Sorry, I can't be more help." As Harriet watched him head off, confusion gnawed at her. Why would Mr. Briggs confide in Adam about a new lock or extra security, yet act clueless with her? Something about this puzzle didn't add up. By midweek, Harriet felt no closer to a definitive explanation. Connie called to say she'd found old records referencing the construction of the shed, but no mention of secret compartments or hidden valuables. "Just standard storage for park maintenance," Connie reported. "At least back then. Who knows how that changed over the decades, though?" That evening, Harriet's curiosity got the better of her. She decided to mosey back to the park after dark. Not too late, she reasoned, but late enough that the park would be mostly deserted. Toby, with his reliable nose, might help sniff out any suspicious presence. Armed with a flashlight and a squeak toy to keep Toby occupied, Harriet quietly slipped through the wrought-iron gates just as the moon illuminated the silhouettes of the old oaks. The night sounds of chirping crickets and the hush of the breeze made the park feel like a different world than in daylight. Harriet kept the flashlight beam close to the ground, scanning for footprints in the grass. Her heart skipped a beat when she noticed faint depressions leading around the backside of the shed. She followed them carefully, hushed tension building. Toby, ears perked, led the way. Peering around the corner, Harriet's breath caught as she detected a faint glow through a narrow gap in the shed's wooden planks. There was a light inside. She knelt down to glean more. The shape of a figure moved within the shadows, a silhouette, crossing the interior. Then the light vanished as quickly as it had come. Harriet felt her heart pounding. She resisted the urge to rush forward, uncertain what she might face. Instead, she retreated, quietly making her way home, resolved to return the next night with a better plan, or at least backup. It was one thing to be intrigued by footprints in daylight. Confronting a potential intruder in a dark, locked shed was quite another. "Here come in, Harriet," conferred with Connie, describing her eerie discovery. Connie's eyes widened behind her round glasses. "You actually saw a light on inside?" she exclaimed. Harriet nodded. "And a figure moving about. But I couldn't tell who or what they were doing," Harriet added. They decided to stake it out together that night, determined to get a clear answer. Harriet felt a rush of anxious excitement. She'd never done a stakeout before, not even in jokes or silly misunderstandings. She recalled reading cozy mysteries where amateur sleuths tiptoed around, holding flashlights and note-tooker. Now she was living the scene herself. That evening, Harriet and Connie arrived at the park just as twilight settled in. Connie had brought a small thermos of cocoa to keep them warm, and Harriet carried her sturdy flashlight. They stationed themselves behind a thick rhododendron bush, which gave them a relatively clear view of the shed. Toby, thankfully, seemed content to lie quietly near their feet, though he occasionally sniffed at the air, ears twitching. The minutes crept by. Just when Harriet began to wonder if she'd imagined the previous night's activity, a sliver of light gleamed under the shed door. Connie gave Harriet's arm a gentle squeeze, heart pounding. The door opened a crack, and a figure slipped inside. Harriet strained to see who it might be. The person, medium height, wore a hooded jacket, shrouding their features in shadow. The door clicked shut. Harriet and Connie exchanged glances. This was indeed the moment of truth. Swallowing her nerves, Harriet motioned for Connie to follow. Together they tiptoed across the grass, Toby padding along behind. Harriet gingerly turned the door's handle, or tried to anyway. It remained locked, as expected. Inside, the rustling of movement could be heard. Connie bent down to peer through a gap in the wooden boards. A few seconds later, she jerked back in surprise, eyes wide. "It's Miss O'Malley," Connie whispered. Miss O'Malley owned the neighborhood bakery on Pine Street, famous for her sourdough loaves and apple tarts. Harriet rubbed her chin, perplexed. Why on earth would the town baker be sneaking around a locked shed at night? A cold rush of adrenaline washed over Harriet. She and Connie retreated behind the shed, pressing their backs gently against the wall. They listened for further sounds. A quiet clink of metal, a few footsteps, and a light scrape, as if a crate or box was being pushed across the floor. Then came a small sigh. Harriet waited, unsure whether Miss O'Malley might exit or remain inside. After several tense minutes, the door opened again, and Miss O'Malley slipped out, closing it behind her and locking it with a key. Harriet froze in place, not wanting to alarm the baker. Miss O'Malley turned, scanning the surroundings nervously, then disappeared into the darkness, toward the east gate of the park. Once sure that Miss O'Malley was gone, Harriet and Connie stepped into the open. They exchanged incredulous looks. Connie broke the silence first. "So Miss O'Malley has access to the shed and is using it for something at night?" She paused. "This is beyond peculiar. Do we confront her now, or go to Mr. Briggs?" Harriet took a breath. "I think we should ask Miss O'Malley directly. She's always been kind and community-minded. I can't imagine she's doing anything that would harm the town. But the secrecy," Connie nodded, chewing her lip. "Yes, let's handle this gently. We don't want to cause a commotion if it's something harmless." With that, they parted ways for the night, deeply curious about the baker's late-night visits. Harriet tried to calm her thoughts enough to fall asleep, but her mind churned with questions. Why would Miss O'Malley need a locked shed in the park, and what was she hauling in or out? Morning found Harriet mustering courage to visit Miss O'Malley's bakery. She told herself she'd be diplomatic, perhaps sample a pastry before asking pointed questions. As she entered the cozy shop, the aroma of fresh bread and cinnamon-laced treats wafted around her. Miss O'Malley stood behind the counter, her apron dusted with flour, the lines of exhaustion under her eyes clearer than Harriet remembered. Harriet purchased a muffin and cleared her throat. "I was out last night," she began softly, "and saw some light in the park's shed. I noticed someone inside. I think it was you." Miss O'Malley's face registered something like alarm, and Harriet added quickly, "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just worried. It seemed secretive, and I'm concerned for your well-being, and the town's." For a moment, Miss O'Malley said nothing, her gaze shifting to the floor. Then she took a breath. "I suppose I owe you an explanation." She gestured for Harriet to follow her to a corner table. Once seated, Miss O'Malley folded her hands. "I was given permission to store some supplies in the shed," she whispered. "You see, times have been tough lately. My bakery rent is overdue, and I'm behind on certain bills. I've been buying flour in bulk at a discount, but I have no room inside my bakery to store the extra. Mr. Briggs offered me a discreet place to keep it, so I wouldn't have to close up shop." Harriet's brow furrowed in surprise. "So, Mr. Briggs gave you a key?" Miss O'Malley nodded. "Well, did. He's been charitable, but he asked that I keep the arrangement quiet. He didn't want folks rummaging or accusing him of impropriety. One night I heard noises near the shed and worried my supplies might be stolen. I've been checking on it after hours, making sure everything is safe." She glanced at Harriet's thoughtful expression. "I know it seems sneaky, but I'm not doing anything illegal. Just a baker trying to keep her business afloat." A wave of relief rolled over Harriet. The puzzling footprints, the late-night visits, it all had an innocent explanation. "That's understandable. But why so many different footprints? Are other people getting keys too?" Miss O'Malley sighed. "Well, I asked a few friends in town if they needed extra storage. They might have taken a look. I assumed the caretaker would oversee the details, though maybe he's been less than forthcoming." "I'm sorry for the confusion, Harriet. I promise there's nothing criminal going on." Harriet smiled kindly. "I'm glad to hear that. but you should consider letting folks know you're struggling. The community might be able to help." Mrs. O'Malley's eyes welled with gratitude, and she lowered them, nodding. "Perhaps you're right," she said, voice quiet. Buoyed by this knowledge, Harriet left the bakery, determined to piece the final parts of the mystery together. Later that day, she ran into Mr. Briggs near the duck pond. He looked uncomfortable when Harriet mentioned she knew about Miss O'Malley's stored supplies. "Please, you know how quickly gossip travels in a small town. She's just trying to stay afloat. I couldn't refuse her." Harriet nodded. "I understand, Mr. Briggs. And your heart's in the right place. One question, though. Why not tell me the truth when I first asked?" He wiped his brow and shrugged. "I was afraid word would slip out that the park's shed housed something other than maintenance equipment. We didn't want unscrupulous folks rummaging through Miss O'Malley's supplies. She's already had a worrisome time with finances. I was trying to protect her." His gaze was earnest, and Harriet believed him. "So, who else did you give keys to?" Harriet asked. "I only gave Miss O'Malley a single key," he said. "Perhaps she lent it to a few trusted friends. Maybe that's why there are multiple footprints." He heaved a sigh. "I was going to install a sturdier lock so I could sleep better at night." Harriet recalled that Miss O'Malley had mentioned confiding in acquaintances. That likely explained why there were different-size footprints around the door. Mystery solved, albeit in a different way than Harriet had first imagined. There was no grand criminal scheme, no priceless relic hidden inside, just neighbors banding together to help one of their own, albeit quietly. Harriet's curiosity gave way to compassion, Harriet's natural inclination toward community spirit to kick in. That weekend, she and Connie decided to organize a small fundraiser. Under the guise of a wheelbarrow bake-off, they convinced Miss O'Malley to bring her best pastries and bread to the park gazebo where neighbors gathered for a Saturday morning brunch. True to Dogwood Dale's friendly nature, the event attracted a crowd. Word spread that Miss O'Malley was a bit behind on rent, and soon people insisted on paying a little extra for her treats, adding generous tips that went straight toward her bakery's expenses. Connie performed a short reading from a local history pamphlet, entertaining folks while Harriet and Miss O'Malley served fresh rolls. Toby wandered around the chairs, wagging his tail merrily at the children who petted him. By lunchtime, they'd collected enough money to cover Miss O'Malley's past-due rent. Tears shone in the baker's eyes, and Harriet felt her heart swell at the sight of genuine gratitude and relief. In the days that followed, the footprints around the shed gradually faded. Miss O'Malley moved her flour stock back to her bakery, and Mr. Briggs quietly changed the lock. The caretaker seemed both relieved and proud to have done his part without attracting too much drama. Harry had noticed that the once furtive glances he'd given her were replaced by an easy smile. The only footprints around the shed now were Mr. Briggs's boots and occasionally Adam's sturdy work shoes. Despite the mystery's benign resolution, Harriet felt a surge of pride in her community. She realized that sometimes suspicious activity could be a sign not of wrongdoing, but of concealed hardships and secret kindness. Whenever Harriet walked Toby around Dogwood Dale's park, she thought of how quickly her concern had morphed into curiosity, and how that same curiosity led to an even deeper appreciation of her neighbors. In a small town like theirs, hidden stories always seem to bubble up, footprints left behind by kind hearts rather than criminals. As she finished her usual morning route one day, Harriet passed by the shed and paused to reminisce about the swirl of intrigue. Toby wagged his tail, as if in acknowledgement of the shed's now quiet presence. Harriet patted his head and chuckled. Perhaps Dogwood Dale's shed would remain locked most of the time, but she'd never look at it quite the same way. And if she ever spied mysterious footprints again, she'd remember that not all secrets were sinister. Some were simply neighbors helping neighbors in the hush of moonlight, hopeful that a little discretion could stave off the burdens of life, one bag of flour at a time.